let's get going again. So, welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 4, Session 6b, The Kingdoms of the Prophet Solomon, Part 2. The greatest accomplishment of Solomon was building the temple. It was the crown jewel of the Jewish nation and culture for almost 1,000 years. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and then it was rebuilt. And the second temple was remodeled by Herod. Then in 70 AD, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. Curiously, both temples were destroyed on the same date, the 9th of Ab. David had assembled many of the raw materials for the temple. He also had organized the priests and Levites. They had cast lots for their positions. They were divided up into 24 courses or work shifts in 1 Chronicles 24. Each shift would come in for 1 week and do that twice a year. And then all would come in also for the 3 7-day feasts. So Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. That's how the work was divided up for the temple. The high priest would stay in Jerusalem and officiate over all. David had received guidance also for the architecture and the furnishings of the temple. So let's go to 1 Chronicles chapter 28. 1 Chronicles chapter 28 verse 11. David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch and of the houses thereof, of the treasuries thereof, and the upper chambers thereof, and of the inner parlors thereof, and of the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of the Lord, and of all the chambers round about, of the treasuries of the house of God, and the treasuries of the dedicated things, also for the courses of the priests and the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and for all the vessels of service in the house of the Lord. That was all by revelation. Wow. So he also organized the singers and the musicians. 1 Chronicles 25, verse 6. All these were under the hands of their father for song in the house of the Lord, with cymbals and psalteries and harps, for the service of the house of God, according to the king's order, to Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman. So the number of them with their brethren that were instructed in the songs of the Lord, and all that were cunning, that in musicians, in other words, were 268. So 288 were in the musical troupe. And they cast lots, ward against ward, as well the small as the great, the teacher as the scholar. So, David had even put together the liturgy, the order of the service for the everyday sacrifices, and also for the feast days. And these are outlined in a book by Alfred Edersheim, Edersheim, named The Temple. I think you can get that too on archive.org. The Temple by Alfred Edersheim. So, when all these preparations had been made, Solomon started building. 1 Kings chapter 5. 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 1. And Hiram king of Tyre sent his servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king in the position of his father, for Hiram was ever a lover of David. So Hiram was in Phoenicia, the kingdom just north of David. And David didn't attack it and take it over. He made friends with them. Hiram. So Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, you know how David my father could not build a house unto the name of the Lord his God, for the wars which were about him on every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God hath given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrent. And behold, I propose to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke unto David my father, saying, thy son, whom I will set upon thy throne in thy position, he shall build a house unto my name. Now therefore command thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, and my servants shall be with your servants. And unto thee will I give hire for thy servants according to all that thou shalt appoint. You tell me how much, I'll pay it. For thou knowest that there is not among us any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians, you guys. And it came to pass, when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, that he rejoiced greatly, and said, blessed be the Lord this day, which hath given unto David a wise son over this great people. And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have considered the things which thou wast sent to me for, and I will do all thy desire concerning timber of cedar and concerning timber of fir. My servants shall bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea, and I will convey them by sea in floats unto the place that thou shalt appoint me, and I will cause them to be discharged there, and thou shalt receive them, and thou shalt accomplish my desire in giving food for my household. So, the Lebanese people were known for their woodworking skill, because the forested area in the Levant was there, up north, where they lived. Otherwise, everyone in Israel built in stone. That was one striking thing I saw when I traveled to Israel in 2001. Everything was built in cement block or stone. There was very little wood. Wood was a luxury. And so, chapter 5, verse 12. The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and they two made a league together. And King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel. And the levy was 30,000 men. So there was no unemployment there. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months they were home. All right? And then he set Adoniram over the levy. Solomon had 70,000 that bear burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains. Beside the chief of Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought in the work. And the king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and hewed stones, to lay the foundations of the house. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them, and the stone squarers, so they prepared timber and the stones to build the house. Now, these stones that they used were huge because of the earthquake zone that they were in. And the large stones then were stable when they built. Chapter 6, verse 1 gives us the date for the beginning of the building of the temple. And this date is such a pivotal date. It's marked by one of those chronological time spans upon which the backbone of Old Testament history is built. Red Minetti mentioned this already in his chronology work, and we'll probably be hearing about it again. Chapter 6, verse 1, came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So that 480-year span comes from when they left in the Exodus out of the land of Egypt. Ren taught us about that time span. So anyway, verse 2. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. A cubit is about 18 inches. And the porch before the temple of the house, 20 cubits was the length thereof according to the breadth of the house. 10 cubits was the breadth thereof before the house. And for the house he made windows of narrow lights. And against the wall of the house he built chambers round about. And against the wall of the house round about, both of the temple and the oracle, he made chambers round about. Verse 6, and the nethermost chamber was 5 cubits broad, and the middle was 6 cubits broad, and the third was 7 cubits broad. For without, in the wall of the house, he made narrowed rests round about, that the beams should not be fastened in the walls of the house. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone, made ready before it was brought thither. So there was neither hammer nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in building. So it was prefabricated. Wow. Talk about modern techniques. Wow. Verse 8. And the door for the middle chamber was in the right side of the house, and they went up with winding stairs into the middle chamber and out of the middle unto the third. So he built the house and finished it, and covered the house with beams and boards of cedar. And then he built chambers against all the house, 5 cubits high, and they rested on the house with timber of cedar. Now, just like the dimensions and the angles of the Great Pyramid were symbolic, the temple also is. The Holy of Holies was a cube shape. So also is the shape of New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, a cube shape. Rene Fretz has pictures of what the temple was like on his trygod.com website with a hyphen in between. By the way, speaking of shapes, today is Pi Day, March 14th, 3.14. Rene presents lots of material on the math and symbolism of the Bible in his blogs, on his website, and there's a beautiful diagram of the temple in his blog that's titled Joshua's Long Day. Rene also has an article on the temple titled The Celestial Symbolism of the Hebrew Temple and Tabernacle. So he talks about all these proportions and gives significance. Chapter 6, verse 15. So Solomon built the walls of the house within with boards of cedar, both the floor of the house and the walls of the ceiling, and he covered them on the inside with wood and covered the floor of the house with planks of fir. He built 20 cubits on the sides of the house, both the floor and the walls, with boards of cedar. He even built them for it within, even for the oracle, even for the most holy place. And the house that is the temple before it was 40 cubits long, and the cedar of the house within was carved with knops, K-N-O-P-S. Now, the Hebrew for that is colocynth gourds, or melon shapes. Okay, they had melon shapes. And open flowers. That was all cedar. It must have been beautiful. And there was no stone seen. And the oracle he prepared in the house within to set there the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in height thereof. And he overlaid it with pure gold, and so covered the altar, which was of cedar. Wow. Chapter 6, verse 21. So Solomon overlaid the house within with pure gold, and he made a partition up by the chains of gold before the oracle, and he overlaid it with gold. And the whole house he overlaid with gold until he had finished all the house. Also the whole altar that was by the oracle he overlaid with gold. And within the oracle he made 2 cherubim of olive tree, each 10 cubits high. Wow. So 15 feet high. And 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the uttermost part of one wing unto the uttermost part of the other were 10 cubits, 15 feet. And the other cherub was 10 cubits. Both the cherubim were of one measure and one size. And the height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, so it was of the other cherub. And he set the cherubim within the inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubim, so that the wings of the one touched the one wall, and the wings of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the midst of the house. And he overlaid the cherubim with gold. Wow. Now, some scholars believe that the temple represented the Garden of Eden, with the 2 cherubim guarding the door inside. On the walls, there were figures of palm trees and flowers and melons, so like a garden. Other scholars say that it represented the universe with God in the center. But the real representation that it was a more formal version of the tabernacle. All the parts of the tabernacle and the religious functions that were carried out there at the tabernacle were foreshadowing the Redeemer and our redemption. And the temple was a more formal presentation of that. We covered a lot of that in the One Baptism of Original Christianity class, but a class could be taught on the temple and tabernacle alone, just a whole class. Verse 37, chapter 6, verse 37. In the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid, in the month Ziph, and in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So he was 7 years in building it. So, construction of the temple took 7 years. Now, we usually speak of Solomon in glowing terms of how wise he was and how rich and powerful he was. Well, he was all that. But he was human too. And honestly, it's a shame, but it seems like power and riches do things to good people. It's very difficult to stay humble. It's difficult to not be affected by riches. And of course, on top of all that is the fact that the adversary is attracted to human centers of power. For from there, he can effect more influence with less resources. So whether we like it or not, the rich and the powerful become a focal point for the spiritual battle between God and the devil, between good and evil. And frankly, if you are rich enough to get anything you want, often Satan preys upon that to entice and manipulate and corrupt. His goal is to use them to his ends. And many of the rich and powerful have succumbed. Now, I'm not saying this out of envy or hatred. It's a fact that it happens, and it even happened to Solomon. And we can see cracks starting to form because he spent more time on his own house than he did on the temple. Chapter 7, verse 1. 1 Kings 7:1. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. And he built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars, with cedar beams upon the pillars. And it was covered with cedar above upon the beams, that they lay on 45 pillars, 15 in a row. Chapter 7, verse 8. And his house where he dwelt had another court within the porch, which was of like work. Solomon made also a house for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken to wife, like unto this porch. All these were of costly stones, according to the measure of hewed stones, sawed with saws, within and without, even from the foundation unto the coping, and also on the outside toward the great court. Now, so he spent more time building all this than he did the temple. Now, chapter 7 of Kings now goes back to talk about the furnishings of the temple. Chapter 7, verse 13. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. So many of the pieces of furniture and the vessels for the temple were made out of brass. They were also cast in gold and bronze and silver. Chapter 7, verse 51. So was ended all the work that King Solomon made for the house of the Lord. Solomon brought in the things that David his father had dedicated, even the silver and the gold and the vessels did he put among the treasures of the house of the Lord. So now it was ready to be dedicated. And they had a great assembly. Chapter 8, verse 1. Then Solomon assembled all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, the chief of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, that he might bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto the king Solomon at the feast in the month Ethanim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came. Now, later on, the 7th month became known as Tishri. Alright? Anyway, all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark. And they brought up the ark of the Lord, and the tabernacle of the congregation, and all of the holy vessels that were in the tabernacle, even those did the priests and the Levites bring up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel that were assembled unto him were with him before the ark, sacrificing sheep and oxen that could not be told nor numbered for multitude. And the priests brought in the ark of the covenant of the Lord unto his place, into the oracle of the house, to the most holy place, even under the wings of the cherubims. So, it goes on to say in verse 9, there was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone, which Moses put there at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel, when they came out of the land of Egypt. And it came to pass, when the priests were come out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord had filled the house of the Lord. Then spake Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. I have surely built thee a house to dwell in, a settled place for thee to abide in forever. And the king turned his face about, and blessed all the congregation of Israel, and all the congregation of Israel stood. And so in chapter 8, verse 15, all the way through, Solomon blesses them, he prays, he dedicates the temple. And what's interesting is, well, I'll read a little bit of it. Verse, 26. And now, O God of Israel, let thy word, I pray thee, be verified, which thou spakest to thy servant David my father. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have built? Yet have thou respect unto the prayer of thy servant, and to his supplication, O Lord my God, to hearken unto the cry and to the prayer which thy servant prays before thee today, that thine eyes may be open towards this house, night and day, even toward the place of which thou hast said, my name shall be there, and thou mayest hearken unto the prayer which thy servant shall make towards this place. And hearken thou to the supplication of thy servant and of thy people Israel, when they shall pray toward this place. And hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and when thou hearest, forgive. See, now, he's dedicating this place as sacred. And so throughout all of these verses, it repeats this house, this place, this house, this place. Verse 30, and hearken to the supplication of thy servant and thy people, that when they shall pray towards this place, and hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. If any man trespass against his neighbor, and an oath be laid upon him to cause him to swear, and the oath come before thine altar in this house, then hear thou in heaven, and do, and judge thy servants, condemning the wicked to bring his way upon his head, and justifying the righteous to give him according to his righteousness. And when thy people Israel be smitten down before the enemy, because they have sinned against thee, and shall turn again to thee, and confess thy name, and pray, and make supplication unto thee in this house, then hear thou in heaven, and forgive the sin of thy people Israel, and bring them again into the land which thou gavest to their fathers, when heaven is shut up, and there is no rain, because they have sinned against thee, if they pray toward this place, and confess thy name, and turn from their sin, when thou afflictest them, then hear thou in heaven, and forgive the sin of thy servants, and of thy people Israel, that thou teach them the good way wherein they should walk, and give rain upon thy land, which thou hast given to thy people for an inheritance. If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, if there be caterpillar, if their enemy besiege them in the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer and supplications soever be made by any man, or by thy people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and spread forth his hands toward this house, then hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive and do, and give to every man according to his ways, whose heart thou knowest, for thou, even thou only, knows the hearts of all the children of men, that they may reverence thee all the days that they live in the land which thou givest unto our fathers. And just it goes on, mentioning this house, this house, this house. So he's dedicating the house. He's dedicating this place. Chapter 8, verse 54. And it was so that when Solomon had made an end of praying all this prayer and supplications unto the Lord, that he arose from before the altar of the Lord, kneeling upon his knees, with his hands spread up to heaven. And he stood and blessed all the congregation of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be the Lord that had given rest unto his people Israel, according to all that he promised. And there hath not failed one word of all his good promise, which he promised by the hands of Moses his servant. That the Lord our God may be with us as he was with our fathers. Let him not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts unto him and walk in all his ways and keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, which he commanded our fathers. And let these my words wherewith I have made supplication before the Lord be nigh unto the Lord our God day and night, that he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel at all times. And the matter shall require that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and that there is none else. Let your heart therefore be perfect with the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes, to keep his commandments, as at this day. And the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. And Solomon offered a sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered unto the Lord, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the children of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. Wow. That was a big feast. In fact, chapter 8, verse 65, at the time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation, from the entering of Hamath unto the river Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days. Then on the 8th day, finally, he sent the people away. They blessed the king and went to their tents, joyful and glad of heart, for all the goodness that the Lord hath done for David his servant, and for Israel his people. Wow. So they dedicated the temple. After that, in chapter 9, the Lord appeared to Solomon again. And so we get down to chapter 9, verse 10. So it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the 2 houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, that Hiram king of Tyre had furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees and with gold, according to all his desire. Then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Now, it's funny, the king of Tyre inspected them and he didn't like them. But this is the first half, the first 20 years of Solomon that were spent in building those 2 houses. But after this, it seems as though things started going downhill. Chapter 9, verse 15. This is the reason for the levy which King Solomon raised, for to build the house of the Lord in his own house, and Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. So these are different forts, all right? Verse 16. For Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up, taken Gezer, burned it with fire, and slain the Canaanites that dwelt there in the city, and gave it for a present unto his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon built Gezer, and Beth-horon, the nether, and Baalath, and Tidmore in the wilderness in the land, and all the cities of store which Solomon had, the cities for his chariots, cities for his horsemen, that which Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. And all the people that were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel. Now, he's talking about all those people that Joshua said you have to displace. And the children of Israel did not kick them out. They stayed. Well, all those people, verse 21, their children that were left after them in the land, whom the children of Israel also were not able to utterly destroy, upon those did Solomon levy a tribute of slavery, bond service, unto this day. The Hebrew word is mas obed, slavery. Verse 22, you've heard about the mines of Solomon. That's what they did, among other things. But of the children of Israel did Solomon make no bondmen, but they were men of war, and his servants, and his princes, and his captains, and rulers of his chariots, and of his horsemen. So, Solomon did a lot of building. He had a lot of building projects, and that costs money, and it takes time. Well, how could he afford that? What did he do so that he could do that? Well, he enslaved all these people in the Mas Obed, and he had the children of Israel work. And they taxed them heavily. Well, the burden of all this construction was very heavy. And later on, it came back to bite him. But before we cover that, we have to talk about the Queen of Sheba. This is another story about Solomon's wisdom and power. Chapter 10, verse 1. Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, and she came to prove him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions, and there was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all of Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, how they carried themselves, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent, by which he went up unto the house of the Lord with such dignity and ceremony, there was no more breath in her. And she said to the king, it was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit, I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, thy half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I heard. Happy are your men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, therefore made he thee king, to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and spices, a very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these, which the Queen of Sheba gave King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram, that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir great plenty of almond trees and precious stones. And the king made of the almond trees pillars for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house, harps also and psalteries for singers. There came no such almond trees, nor were seen unto this day. The king Solomon gave unto the Queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. She turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. Verse 14. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Now, 666. Now, that's much more of a symbolic symbol than literal. And this was indicating Solomon's downfall. God specifically had listed things that the Hebrew king should not do in Deuteronomy, and Solomon broke those rules. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16, Deuteronomy 17:16. But he shall not multiply horses to himself. Well, Solomon did. Nor cause the people to return to Egypt. Well, that's one thing he didn't do. To the end that he should multiply horses, forasmuch as the Lord has said to you, you shall not henceforth return no more that way. Verse 17. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself. Well, Solomon did. That his heart turned not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Well, Solomon did. Chapter 10, verse 27, 1 Kings. Chapter 10, verse 27. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, that common. And cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn. And the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. All this splendor came at a cost, and the cost was too high. Chapter 11, verse 1. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of all the nations concerning which the Lord said to the children of Israel, You shall not go in unto them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after other gods. Well, Solomon clave unto these in love. Chapter 11, verse 3. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. That's 1,000. That would be 3 a day for a year. I mean, Solomon had it better than a chimpanzee. Do you think maybe all that monkeying around got to his head? Well, how could it not? It came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said to Solomon, Forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days will I not do it, for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit, I will not rend away all the kingdoms, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. So, now we leave Solomon and move on to what followed. This indeed was the golden age of Israel, but its zenith was short-lived, for Solomon's luxuries were too costly, and when he died, his son, Rehoboam, mismanaged the transition of royal power, which led to the split of the kingdom. And Israel would not rise to such prestige or riches or power as were under David and Solomon, except for the promise of a future kingdom with an incorruptible king, the Son of God, Christ Jesus. And we all await the millennial kingdom, which shall rule the world in righteousness. Bless you.